Before the first human hand ever touched stone, before the first footprint marked the chalk downs, before even the concept of time existed in any conscious mind, the story of Stonehenge was already being written in the language of geology, in the patient accumulation of microscopic shells, in the slow dance of tectonic plates, and in the relentless sculpting power of ice and water that would shape one of Earth's most remarkable landscapes. To understand Stonehenge is to understand that its story begins not thousands, but hundreds of millions of years ago, in an epoch so distant that the very continents wore different faces and occupied different positions upon the globe. The Salisbury Plain, that vast undulating expanse of chalk downland that would one day cradle humanity's most enigmatic monument, owes its existence to events that unfolded during the Cretaceous period, approximately 100 million years before the present day. During this distant epoch, the region that would become southern England lay submerged beneath a warm, shallow sea that teemed with microscopic life forms whose individual existences lasted mere days, but whose collective legacy would endure for eternity. These countless billions of coccolithophores, foraminifera, and other planktonic organisms lived, reproduced, and died in waters that stretched across much of what is now northwestern Europe, their calcium carbonate shells drifting slowly downward through the water column to accumulate on the seabed in layers that grew imperceptibly thicker with each passing millennium. The process of chalk formation represents one of nature's most patient and persistent geological phenomena, requiring conditions of remarkable stability maintained across spans of time that dwarf all of human history. The warm Cretaceous seas provided ideal conditions for the proliferation of calcium-secreting organisms, while the relative absence of terrestrial sediment input allowed the biogenic material to accumulate without significant dilution. Year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium, the chalk deposits grew thicker, eventually reaching depths of several hundred meters in some locations. The weight of overlying sediments gradually compressed the accumulated shells, transforming loose calcareous ooze into the dense, white limestone that would become the foundation of the Salisbury Plain landscape. The chalk formation process continued for approximately 35 million years, creating deposits that would eventually be uplifted, tilted, and eroded to form the distinctive landscape of southern England. The Wessex Basin, the geological structure that encompasses the Stonehenge region, represents a broad syncline where chalk deposits achieved their maximum thickness before subsequent tectonic activity raised them above sea level. The gentle folding and faulting that accompanied this uplift created the subtle topographic variations that would prove so significant for the monument's eventual placement, with the Stonehenge site occupying a position on a slight ridge that provides commanding views across the surrounding countryside while remaining visible from considerable distances in all directions. The geological advantages of the chalk bedrock for monument construction cannot be overstated, representing a fortuitous combination of characteristics that made the Salisbury Plain uniquely suited to support massive stone structures. Unlike the clay-heavy soils found elsewhere in Britain, chalk provides excellent drainage, while remaining stable enough to bear enormous loads without significant settling or shifting. The porous nature of chalk allows rainwater to percolate rapidly downward, preventing the waterlogging that would destabilize foundations, while creating underground aquifers that feed springs and rivers throughout the region. These aquifers, recharged by rainfall across the extensive chalk outcrop, provided reliable water sources that made permanent human settlement possible in a landscape that might otherwise have been too dry for sustained occupation. The River Avon, which flows approximately 2 miles east of the Stonehenge site, owes its existence to these chalk aquifers emerging from springs where the water table intersects the land surface and maintaining flow even during the driest summer months. This reliable water source would prove crucial for the communities that eventually settled in the region, providing not only drinking water for humans and livestock, but also supporting the diverse ecosystems that supplied food, materials, and other resources essential for survival. The river's course through the landscape created natural corridors for movement and communication, connecting the Stonehenge area to distant regions and facilitating the trade and cultural exchange that would characterize the monument's later development. The chalk bedrock's proximity to the surface across much of the Salisbury Plain offered additional advantages for ancient peoples who sought to modify the landscape through monument construction. Unlike regions where bedrock lies buried beneath thick deposits of soil and subsoil, the Salisbury Plain's thin soil cover allowed relatively easy access to stable foundation material, capable of supporting structures weighing hundreds of tons. The chalk itself could be quarried and shaped using relatively simple tools, providing building material for the banks and mounds that would characterize the region's earliest monuments, while offering a stable substrate for the massive stone settings that would follow. The glacial history of the Salisbury Plain, though less dramatic than that of regions further north, played crucial roles in shaping the landscape that Stonehenge's builders would eventually inhabit. During the Pleistocene epoch, repeated glacial advances and retreats created periglacial conditions across southern England, with intense freeze-thaw cycles fracturing exposed rock surfaces and creating the characteristic dry valleys that dissect the chalk downland. These valleys, carved by meltwater streams during periods of glacial retreat, provided natural routeways through the landscape, while creating the topographic diversity that would influence monument placement and ceremonial activities. The sarsen stones that would eventually form Stonehenge's most impressive features owe their presence in the landscape to geological processes that unfolded during the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, approximately 56 to 34 million years ago. These massive sandstone blocks formed when silica-rich groundwater percolated through sandy deposits, cementing the grains together into extremely hard, dense stone that resisted the erosion processes that removed surrounding materials. The resulting sarsen boulders, scattered across the Marlborough Downs some 20 miles north of Stonehenge, represented a geological resource of exceptional quality that would eventually attract the attention of monument builders seeking materials capable of withstanding the ages. The formation of sarsen stone required specific geological conditions that occurred only in limited areas of southern England, making these massive boulders relatively rare and valuable resources for prehistoric communities. The silica cement that binds sarsen grains together creates a stone of remarkable hardness and durability, capable of withstanding weathering processes that would rapidly destroy softer materials. The largest sarsen boulders, weighing up to 50 tons, represented natural monuments in their own right, their presence in the landscape perhaps inspiring the ambitions of communities who would eventually undertake the extraordinary effort of transporting them to Stonehenge. The bluestone sources in the Preseli Hills of southwestern Wales represent another crucial geological component of the Stonehenge story, though their connection to the monument would not be established until human agency intervened to bridge the 150 miles separating these distant landscapes. The Preseli Hills contain outcrops of distinctive igneous and metamorphic rocks, including spotted dolerite, rhyolite, and volcanic ash, that formed during ancient volcanic episodes and were subsequently exposed through erosion of overlying materials. These rocks, with their distinctive blue-gray coloration when freshly broken or wet, possessed qualities that apparently held special significance for prehistoric peoples, inspiring one of the most remarkable logistical achievements of the ancient world. The geological diversity of the Stonehenge landscape, combining chalk bedrock, sarsen boulders, and eventually Welsh bluestones, created a monument that embodied connections across vast distances and deep time. Each stone type carried its own geological history, its own story of formation and transformation that stretched back millions of years before human consciousness emerged to contemplate such matters. The monument's builders, whether they understood these geological processes in any systematic way, or simply observed the distinctive properties of different stone types, created an architectural composition that brought together materials from across Britain's varied geological provinces, uniting them in a structure that would endure for millennia. The landscape that greeted the first human visitors to the Salisbury Plain had been shaped by these geological processes into a distinctive environment that offered unique advantages for settlement and monument construction. The rolling chalk downs, with their thin soils and natural grasslands, provided excellent grazing for wild herbivores that would attract human hunters, while the reliable water sources and well-drained soils would eventually support agricultural communities capable of producing the surpluses necessary for ambitious construction projects. The geological foundation had been laid. The stage was set for the human drama that would unfold across the following millennia. The intersection of geological processes across hundreds of millions of years created at the Salisbury Plain a landscape uniquely suited to become the setting for one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. The chalk bedrock provided stable foundations, the aquifers ensured reliable water supplies, the sarsen boulders offered building materials of exceptional quality, and the landscape's visibility and accessibility made it a natural focal point for communities across the wider region. These geological advantages, combined with the cultural and social developments that would unfold during the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods, would eventually produce a monument that continues to inspire wonder and investigation more than 4,000 years after its completion. The retreat of the last great ice sheets, approximately 12,000 years ago, initiated a transformation of the British landscape that would eventually make human habitation possible in regions that had been locked beneath glacial ice or rendered uninhabitable by periglacial conditions. As temperatures rose and ice margins retreated northward, pioneering plant species colonized newly exposed ground, followed by the animals that depended upon them, and eventually by the human hunters who pursued those animals across landscapes that were being remade before their eyes. The Salisbury Plain, though never directly glaciated during the last ice age, experienced profound environmental changes as warming temperatures transformed tundra vegetation into woodland and created the ecological conditions that would attract the first human inhabitants. The Mesolithic period, spanning roughly from 10,000 to 4,000 BC in Britain, witnessed the gradual colonization of the post-glacial landscape by small bands of hunter-gatherers, whose mobile lifestyles left minimal archaeological traces compared to the monumental constructions that would follow. These early inhabitants of the Salisbury Plain lived in intimate relationship with their environment, moving seasonally across the landscape to exploit different resources as they became available throughout the year. Their knowledge of plant growth cycles, animal migration patterns, and seasonal resource availability represented accumulated wisdom passed down through countless generations, enabling survival in environments that would challenge modern humans lacking such traditional ecological knowledge. Archaeological evidence for Mesolithic occupation of the Salisbury Plain comes primarily from excavations at Blickmead, a remarkable site located less than 2 miles from the future Stonehenge location. that has revealed continuous human presence spanning more than 3,000 years. The Blick Mead site occupies a position adjacent to a natural spring that would have provided reliable water throughout the year, creating an oasis of resources in a landscape where water availability varied seasonally. The spring's constant temperature, maintained by the thermal mass of the underlying chalk aquifer, would have attracted animals during winter months when other water sources froze, making the location an ideal hunting station for Mesolithic communities. The excavations at Blick Mead have recovered thousands of worked flint pieces that document the sophisticated tool-making traditions of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. The flint technology of these early inhabitants reached remarkable levels of refinement, producing tools precisely adapted to specific tasks and demonstrating intimate knowledge of raw material properties and knapping techniques. Microliths, the tiny geometric flint pieces that served as arrow points and composite tool elements, required exceptional skill to manufacture, with their production involving carefully controlled sequences of flake removal that transformed nodules of raw flint into functional implements measuring only a few centimeters in length. The hunting strategies employed by Mesolithic communities on the Salisbury Plain exploited the distinctive characteristics of the chalk downland environment. The relatively open nature of the landscape, with its rolling hills and scattered woodland, favored hunting techniques that relied on driving game toward natural or constructed barriers where animals could be dispatched with arrows or spears. Archaeological evidence suggests that Mesolithic hunters used fire to manage vegetation, creating clearings that attracted grazing animals and made hunting more predictable. This early landscape management represented humanity's first significant alteration of the Salisbury Plain environment, initiating a process of anthropogenic modification that would continue and intensify throughout subsequent millennia. The social organization of Mesolithic communities on the Salisbury Plain remains partially obscure due to the limited archaeological evidence available, but comparative studies of hunter-gatherer societies worldwide suggest that these groups lived in small mobile bands rarely exceeding 30 individuals. These bands were likely organized around kinship relationships, with membership fluid and individuals moving between groups according to marriage arrangements, resource availability, and social preferences. The absence of permanent settlements or substantial material accumulations suggests relatively egalitarian social structures where leadership was situational rather than hereditary, and where wealth differences between individuals remained minimal. The spiritual beliefs and ritual practices of Mesolithic communities are even more difficult to reconstruct than their social organization, but certain patterns in the archaeological record suggest that these early inhabitants of the Salisbury Plain possessed complex cosmological understandings that influenced their behavior and landscape use. The repeated return to specific locations like Blick Mead over thousands of years suggests that certain places held special significance that transcended their practical utility as resource procurement sites. The careful treatment of animal remains, with specific bones selected for retention or special disposal, indicates beliefs about the spiritual dimensions of hunting and the relationships between humans and the animals they pursued. The aurochs, the massive wild cattle that roamed post-glacial Europe, held particular significance for Mesolithic communities, as evidenced by the careful treatment of aurochs remains at sites across the Salisbury Plain. These enormous animals, standing nearly 2 meters at the shoulder and weighing up to a ton, represented both valuable food resources and dangerous adversaries whose successful hunting required courage, skill, and cooperation. The symbolic importance of aurochs in Mesolithic belief systems is suggested by the prominent display of aurochs' skulls and horns at contemporary sites across Europe, indicating that these animals occupied special positions in cosmological frameworks that extended far beyond their practical utility. The transition from Mesolithic to Neolithic lifeways on the Salisbury Plain occurred gradually over several centuries, with the introduction of farming practices and domesticated animals transforming human relationships with the landscape in fundamental ways. The first Neolithic settlers, arriving around 4000 BC, brought with them not only new subsistence technologies, but also new social structures, belief systems, and architectural traditions that would eventually produce the monuments for which the region is now famous. Yet the Mesolithic heritage was not entirely erased. Rather, it was incorporated into emerging Neolithic traditions that built upon earlier understandings of the landscape while transforming them according to new cultural frameworks. The Mesolithic inhabitants of the Salisbury Plain established patterns of landscape use and sacred geography that would influence monument placement and ceremonial activities for millennia to come. Their repeated visits to specific locations, their management of vegetation through fire, and their intimate knowledge of the landscape's resources and rhythms created a cultural geography that Neolithic communities would inherit and elaborate. The springs, hilltops, and river crossings that held significance for Mesolithic hunter-gatherers would continue to attract attention and investment throughout the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods, suggesting continuities in sacred geography that transcended the dramatic economic and social changes accompanying the agricultural transition. The archaeological evidence from Blick Mead and other Mesolithic sites on the Salisbury Plain reveals that the landscape which would eventually host Stonehenge had been recognized as special, as worthy of repeated visitation and careful attention, for thousands of years before the first monument was constructed. The Mesolithic inhabitants may not have built in stone or earth, but they established relationships with the landscape that would profoundly influence subsequent developments. Their footprints, though invisible in the archaeological record, marked the beginning of a human engagement with this particular corner of southern England that would eventually produce one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. The knowledge accumulated by Mesolithic communities about the Salisbury Plain's resources, rhythms, and sacred geography represented an invaluable inheritance that Neolithic settlers would build upon as they transformed the landscape through monument construction and agricultural development. The springs that had attracted Mesolithic hunters would continue to draw visitors throughout subsequent millennia. The hilltops that had served as lookout points would become locations for burial mounds and ceremonial enclosures. The river corridors that had facilitated Mesolithic movement would be formalized into processional routes connecting monuments across the sacred landscape. The Mesolithic period, though leaving few visible traces in the modern landscape, established the foundations upon which all subsequent developments would be built. The arrival of farming on the Salisbury Plain, around 4000 BC, initiated a transformation of human society and landscape that would eventually make possible the construction of monuments on a scale previously unimaginable. The Neolithic Revolution, as this transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture is often called, brought not merely new subsistence technologies but entirely new ways of understanding and interacting with the world. The domestication of plants and animals required fundamentally different relationships with the landscape than those maintained by mobile hunter-gatherers, demanding permanent settlement, territorial definition, and long-term investment in specific locations that would bear fruit only after extended periods of cultivation and care. The first Neolithic settlers on the Salisbury Plain brought with them domesticated cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats, along with knowledge of cereal cultivation that would transform the chalk downlands into productive agricultural landscapes. The wheat and barley varieties introduced during this period were adapted to the well-drained chalk soils, producing reliable harvests that could support larger and more sedentary populations than hunting and gathering had permitted. The livestock provided not only meat and milk but also wool, leather, bone, and horn that served countless practical purposes, while their manure enriched soils and maintained the fertility necessary for sustained agricultural production. The shift to farming required permanent settlements where families could tend their fields and manage their livestock throughout the agricultural year. Unlike Mesolithic camps, which were occupied temporarily and left few archaeological traces, Neolithic settlements featured substantial timber-framed houses with walls of wattle and daub that provided shelter from the elements and storage space for agricultural surpluses. These houses, measuring up to 15 meters in length, were divided into distinct areas for human habitation, food storage, and craft activities, reflecting the increased material complexity of farming communities compared to their hunter-gatherer predecessors. The agricultural surplus generated by Neolithic farming practices created possibilities for social specialization that had been impossible under hunting and gathering economies. For the first time in the region's history, some individuals could devote their time to activities other than direct food production, developing specialized skills in pottery manufacture, flint tool production, textile creation, and eventually monument construction. This specialization required social mechanisms for redistributing food from producers to specialists, creating economic relationships and social obligations that bound communities together while generating the inequalities that would characterize subsequent social development. The Neolithic transformation of the Salisbury Plain extended beyond settlement patterns and subsistence practices to encompass the first monumental constructions that would establish the region as a sacred landscape of exceptional significance. Long before the iconic trilithons rose at Stonehenge, this landscape was already home to impressive earthwork monuments that reflected the growing social complexity and ritual sophistication of farming communities. The causewayed enclosures, long barrows, and cursus monuments that appeared across the Salisbury Plain during the early Neolithic period created a sacred geography that would profoundly influence the placement and design of later monuments, including Stonehenge itself. The causewayed enclosures that appeared across the Salisbury Plain during the early Neolithic period served as gathering places where scattered farming communities came together for ceremonies, trade, and social activities that reinforced bonds across the wider region. Windmill Hill, located 20 miles north of Stonehenge, represents the largest and most complex of these enclosures, with multiple concentric rings of ditches and banks encompassing nearly 21 acres. The interrupted nature of the ditches, with numerous gaps or causeways providing access to the interior, distinguishes these monuments from later defensive enclosures and suggests that their primary functions were ceremonial rather than military. Archaeological excavations at Windmill Hill and other causewayed enclosures have revealed the complexity of Neolithic ritual practices and the scale of gatherings that these sites accommodated. Deposits of deliberately broken pottery, carefully placed animal bones, and human remains indicate that these sites served as focal points for ceremonies involving entire regional communities. The discovery of exotic materials, polished stone axes from distant sources, amber beads from the Baltic, and pottery styles from continental Europe demonstrates that these ritual gatherings also facilitated trade and cultural exchange across vast distances, connecting the Salisbury Plain to networks that spanned much of prehistoric Europe. The long barrows that dot the Salisbury Plain landscape provide additional insight into Neolithic society and beliefs, serving as communal tombs where multiple generations were interred according to complex mortuary traditions. These elongated burial mounds, typically oriented east-west and measuring between 30 and 120 meters in length, required substantial labor investment that demonstrates the importance of ancestor veneration in Neolithic religious practice. The internal structure of long barrows reveals sophisticated architectural knowledge, with carefully constructed stone or timber chambers designed to remain accessible for repeated use over centuries as new generations joined their ancestors in death. The positioning of long barrows across the Salisbury Plain follows clear patterns that reflect Neolithic understanding of landscape symbolism and territorial organization. Most barrows occupy prominent positions, visible from considerable distances, serving as permanent markers of ancestral presence and territorial claims. The relationship between barrow placement and natural landscape features, ridge lines, river valleys, and areas of particularly fertile soil, suggests that these monuments functioned as both burial sites and territorial markers, defining community boundaries and resource rights, while commemorating the ancestors whose labor had established those claims. The Greater Cursus, constructed around 3500 BC, represents one of the earliest and most impressive monuments on the Salisbury Plain, demonstrating the organizational capabilities and ritual sophistication of Neolithic communities. This massive linear earthwork stretches nearly 3 kilometers across the landscape, just north of the future Stonehenge site, consisting of parallel ditches and banks that define a corridor approximately 100 meters wide. The construction of the Greater Cursus required the movement of thousands of tons of chalk, representing a communal effort that would have required coordination among multiple communities across the region, and demonstrated the emergence of leadership capable of organizing large-scale collective projects. The precise function of Cursus monuments remains debated among archaeologists, but their alignment with significant landscape features and astronomical phenomena suggests they served important ritual or ceremonial purposes. The Greater Cursus appears to have been oriented toward specific points on the horizon, where celestial bodies rose or set on significant dates, suggesting that astronomical observation was already an important component of Neolithic religious practice. The monument's enormous length may have served processional purposes, with participants walking its entire course as part of ceremonies that connected different parts of the sacred landscape, while marking important transitions in the agricultural or ceremonial calendar. The proliferation of monument construction during the early Neolithic period reflects profound changes in how human communities understood and interacted with the landscape. These earthworks were not merely functional structures, but sacred spaces that embodied complex beliefs about the relationship between the living, the dead, and the natural world. The careful positioning of monuments in relation to prominent landscape features, hilltops, river valleys, and natural clearings suggests that Neolithic communities perceived the Salisbury Plain as a sacred landscape requiring appropriate ritual attention and architectural elaboration. By 3000 BC, the Salisbury Plain had been transformed from a landscape of scattered Mesolithic camps to a complex ritual landscape dotted with monuments that reflected the growing social complexity and spiritual sophistication of Neolithic farming communities. The Cursus monuments, causewayed enclosures, and long barrows created a sacred geography that would profoundly influence the placement and design of later monuments, including Stonehenge itself. This earlier phase of monument building established the Salisbury Plain as a landscape of particular spiritual significance, attracting pilgrims and ritual participants from across Britain and continental Europe, who came to participate in ceremonies conducted within and around these impressive earthwork constructions. The density of monuments within a 5-mile radius of the future Stonehenge site exceeds that found anywhere else in prehistoric Europe, suggesting that this particular location held special significance that transcended local community needs. The reasons for this concentration remain partially mysterious, but the geological, geographical, and cultural factors that made the Salisbury Plain attractive to its earliest inhabitants clearly continued to influence human behavior as societies became more complex and monument construction more ambitious. The stage was set for the construction of Stonehenge itself, a monument that would synthesize and transcend all that had come before, while establishing new standards for architectural ambition and ritual elaboration. The transformation of the Salisbury Plain into a sacred landscape during the late Neolithic period reached its culmination around 30,100 BC with the construction of the first Stonehenge. This initial monument bore little resemblance to the towering stone trilithons that dominate modern perceptions of the site. Instead, the earliest Stonehenge consisted of a carefully planned earthwork enclosure that would serve as the foundation for over 1,500 years of continuous ritual use and architectural evolution. The first builders approached their task with remarkable precision, creating a nearly perfect circular enclosure that demonstrated sophisticated surveying skills and mathematical understanding, while establishing the sacred precinct within which all subsequent developments would occur. The construction process began with the excavation of a circular ditch measuring approximately 110 meters in diameter, dug to an average depth of 2 meters and width of 6 meters, following the natural contours of the chalk downland. The excavated chalk was piled on the inner side of the ditch to form a bank that originally stood nearly 2 meters high, creating a visual barrier that separated the sacred interior from the profane world beyond. This bank and ditch arrangement, known to archaeologists as a henge monument, followed a distinctive pattern found at numerous sites across Neolithic Britain, but the Stonehenge example demonstrated unusual sophistication in its execution and precision in its circular form. Archaeological excavation of the original ditch has revealed crucial details about the construction process and the people who carried it out. The builders used antler picks and shoulder blade shovels from cattle and red deer, tools that left distinctive marks on the chalk walls of the ditch that remain visible more than 5,000 years after their creation. Radiocarbon dating of these antler tools provides the most reliable evidence for the monument's construction date, with results clustering around 3100 BC. The ditch was not excavated as a continuous effort, but rather in discrete segments, each measuring approximately 10 to 15 meters in length, suggesting that different groups or families were responsible for specific portions of the work. This segmented construction technique reveals important aspects of the social organization that made monument building possible. The division of labor among distinct groups allowed communities to contribute according to their capabilities, while maintaining separate identities within the larger collective effort. Each segment of ditch excavation represented a specific community's investment in the monument, creating obligations and relationships that would persist long after the construction was completed. The successful coordination of these separate efforts required leadership capable of planning the overall project, assigning responsibilities, and ensuring that individual contributions combined to create a coherent whole. The entrance to this first Stonehenge was positioned on the northeast side of the enclosure, marked by a 10-meter gap in both the ditch and bank. This entrance alignment was not arbitrary, but carefully oriented toward the point on the horizon, where the sun rises on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year when the sun reaches its northernmost position in its annual journey across the sky. The precision of this alignment, accurate to within a degree, demonstrates that the builders possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge and considered celestial observations central to the monument's purpose. Additional smaller gaps in the earthwork, located on the south and southwest sides, provided secondary access points that may have served specific ritual functions or accommodated different categories of participants. Within the circular enclosure, the builders created one of the most intriguing features of the entire Stonehenge complex, the Aubrey Holes. Named after the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey, who first identified them. These 56 circular pits form a precise circle, approximately 88 meters in diameter, positioned roughly halfway between the inner edge of the bank and the center of the monument. Each Aubrey hole measures between 0.8 and 1.2 meters in diameter and extends to a depth of up to 1 meter below the original ground surface. The regularity of their spacing, approximately 5 meters apart around the entire circumference, demonstrates the mathematical sophistication of their creators and suggests that the number 56 held specific significance within Neolithic cosmological frameworks. The original function of the Aubrey holes has generated extensive scholarly debate, with archaeological evidence supporting multiple simultaneous uses that evolved over the monument's long history. Excavations have revealed that many of the holes contain cremated human remains, making them among Britain's earliest known cremation cemeteries. The cremations were not random deposits, but carefully placed burials that accumulated over several centuries, with analysis of the cremated bone fragments indicating that both men and women of various ages were interred in the Aubrey holes. This demographic diversity suggests that access to burial within the monument was not restricted to a single social class or gender, but was available to community members who met criteria that remain partially obscure. The cremation burials within the Aubrey holes reveal sophisticated mortuary practices that extended far beyond simple disposal of the dead. Many of the cremated remains show evidence of careful sorting and selection, with only specific bones chosen for burial, while others were presumably disposed of elsewhere or retained for other ritual purposes. Some holes contain multiple individuals whose remains had been mixed together, indicating that communal burial practices were an important aspect of the site's ritual function. The presence of cremated animal bones, particularly cattle and pig, alongside human remains, suggests that feasting and sacrifice were integral components of the burial ceremonies that brought communities together at the monument. Beyond their mortuary function, the Aubrey holes may have served astronomical purposes that complemented the monument's solar alignment. The number 56 has astronomical significance, representing the number of years required for the moon's rising and setting positions to complete a full cycle and return to their starting points. This lunar cycle, known to modern astronomers as the Metonic cycle, would have been observable to careful sky watchers over multiple generations of observation. If the Aubrey holes functioned as a lunar calculator, with markers moved from hole to track the moon's complex movements, they would represent one of humanity's earliest attempts to create a permanent astronomical computer capable of predicting celestial events. Recent archaeological work has identified evidence for wooden posts that once stood in many of the Aubrey holes, transforming our understanding of the monument's early appearance and function. These posts, based on the size and shape of the post holes, would have stood approximately 2 to 3 meters above ground level, creating a timber circle that enclosed the ritual space within the earthwork. The posts were not permanent installations, but were apparently erected and removed multiple times over the monument's early history, suggesting that their presence was tied to specific ceremonies or astronomical events, rather than serving as permanent architectural features. The timber posts within the Aubrey holes were part of a larger wooden architecture that characterized the first Stonehenge, creating a complex wooden temple that preceded the famous stone arrangements by several centuries. Archaeological evidence points to additional post circles and timber structures within the monument's interior, including smaller post circles, linear arrangements of posts, and possibly roofed buildings that provided shelter for ritual activities. The scale and complexity of this timber architecture rivaled that of contemporary wooden temples found elsewhere in Neolithic Europe, demonstrating that the builders of Stonehenge were participating in widespread architectural traditions while adapting them to their specific ritual needs and cosmological understandings. The cultural context for the first Stonehenge construction lies with the Windmill Hill people, a Neolithic culture named after the causewayed enclosure located 20 miles north of Stonehenge. These communities had established themselves across the Wessex region by 30,700 BC, bringing with them sophisticated pottery traditions, advanced flint-working techniques, and complex ritual practices that would profoundly influence the development of Stonehenge. The Windmill Hill culture represented a mature Neolithic society that had moved beyond the experimental farming of earlier periods to establish stable, prosperous communities capable of undertaking monumental construction projects that required coordination across multiple generations. The first phase of Stonehenge remained in active use for approximately 600 years, during which time the monument underwent continuous modification and elaboration that reflected evolving ritual needs and changing social circumstances. The Aubrey holes were repeatedly reopened for additional cremation burials. The timber structures were rebuilt and reconfigured multiple times, and new ritual deposits were added to the ditch and other features. This long period of use and modification demonstrates that Stonehenge served as a living religious center rather than a static monument, adapting to changing ritual needs while maintaining its fundamental character as a place of ancestor veneration, astronomical observation, and community gathering. Around 2600 BC, the builders of Stonehenge embarked upon one of the most extraordinary logistical achievements of prehistoric Europe, a feat of organization, determination, and spiritual devotion that continues to astonish modern observers who struggle to comprehend how such an undertaking could have been accomplished with the technologies available to Neolithic peoples. The decision to transport massive stones across 150 miles of challenging terrain from the Preseli Hills of southwestern Wales to the Salisbury Plain represents a monumental undertaking that fundamentally transformed both the monument and our understanding of Neolithic society's capabilities, revealing organizational sophistication and cultural connections that extended far beyond what earlier scholars had imagined possible. These stones, known today as bluestones, due to their distinctive blue-gray coloration, when freshly broken or wet, would become the first stone circle erected at Stonehenge, marking a revolutionary departure from the timber and earthwork traditions that had characterized the site for the previous 5 centuries. The geological identification of the bluestone's Welsh origins began in the early 20th century, when petrologist Herbert Henry Thomas conducted detailed analysis of stone samples from Stonehenge. Thomas's microscopic examination revealed that the bluestones comprised multiple rock types, including spotted dolerite, rhyolite, and volcanic ash, all of which match geological formations found exclusively in the Preseli Hills of southwestern Wales. This discovery immediately raised profound questions about how and why Neolithic peoples would transport stones weighing between 2 and 4 tons across such vast distances when suitable building materials were readily available much closer to the monument site. Recent archaeological investigations have pinpointed the exact quarry locations where the Stonehenge bluestones were extracted, providing unprecedented insights into the extraction techniques and organizational capabilities of Neolithic quarry workers. At ChronosRest, excavations led by archaeologist Mike Parker Pearson have uncovered compelling evidence of Neolithic quarrying activities dating to approximately 3000 BC, several centuries before the bluestones arrived at Stonehenge. The site reveals a sophisticated extraction operation where ancient quarrymen exploited natural geological weaknesses in the rock face to remove precisely shaped monoliths suitable for monument construction. The quarry workers at ChronosRest used a combination of fire setting, where controlled fires were built against the rock face and then doused with cold water to create thermal shock fractures, and wooden wedges driven into natural cracks to split away usable stones. This technique required intimate knowledge of the rock's geological properties and careful judgment about where to apply heat and pressure to achieve desired results without shattering the stone into unusable fragments. The skill required for successful quarrying was not easily acquired, but represented accumulated expertise passed down through generations of specialists who devoted their lives to understanding and working with stone. The ChronosRest quarry site preserves remarkable evidence of the quarrying process through archaeological deposits that accumulated during the extraction operations. Layers of charcoal from the fire-setting activities provide radiocarbon dates that cluster around 3000 BC, several centuries before the bluestones arrived at Stonehenge. This temporal gap suggests that the stones were not transported immediately after extraction, but may have been used for local monuments in Wales before being moved to the Salisbury Plain. Archaeological survey of the surrounding landscape has identified several stone circles and burial chambers constructed from ChronosRest dolerite, indicating that the quarry supplied multiple monuments across southwestern Wales before its products were transported to their final destination at Stonehenge. The second major bluestone quarry at Carngodog, located approximately 1 mile from ChronosRest, shows similar evidence of Neolithic extraction activities. This site specialized in producing the distinctive spotted dolerite that forms several of the Stonehenge bluestones, exploiting a natural rock formation where geological processes had created naturally occurring pillars of stone that required minimal shaping to produce monument-ready monoliths. The quarry workers removed these natural pillars by undermining their bases and using controlled collapse techniques to bring them down without fracturing the stone, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics and material properties. The transportation of the bluestones from Wales to the Salisbury Plain required solving complex logistical challenges that pushed Neolithic technology and organization to their limits. The most widely accepted transportation theory involves a combined land and water route that took advantage of natural waterways while minimizing the distance that the massive stones needed to be dragged over land. The proposed route begins with overland transport from the Preseli quarries to the nearby Nevern estuary, where the stones could be loaded onto rafts or boats for the sea voyage around the Welsh coast. The maritime portion of the bluestone journey would have followed the Welsh coast eastward to the mouth of the River Severn, then continued up the Severn and its tributary, the River Avon, to a point near present-day Bath. From there, the stones would have been transferred back to overland transport for the final 30-mile journey across the Chalk Downs to Stonehenge. This route, while still representing an enormous undertaking, avoided the most challenging terrain of the Welsh mountains and English hill country, while utilizing the superior carrying capacity of water transport for the majority of the distance. Experimental archaeology has provided valuable insights into the practical challenges of bluestone transport. In 2000, a team led by archaeologist Julian Richards attempted to transport a 3-ton concrete replica of a bluestone using reconstructed Neolithic techniques. The experiment revealed that overland transport required approximately 100 people to move the stone at a rate of less than 1 mile per day over level ground. Rough terrain, hills, and river crossings reduced the daily progress to a few hundred meters and required additional personnel for route preparation and obstacle management. The water transport phase proved more efficient, with a replica bluestone successfully transported by raft across Milford Haven using techniques that could have been available to Neolithic peoples. The logistics of organizing a bluestone transport expedition would have required unprecedented levels of social coordination and resource mobilization. Moving even a single 3-ton stone demanded a workforce of at least 100 individuals, along with additional support personnel responsible for food preparation, route maintenance, and equipment management. Transporting the estimated 80 bluestones that eventually reached Stonehenge would have required multiple expeditions spanning several years, each involving hundreds of participants and enormous quantities of food, tools, and other supplies. The social implications of the Bluestone Transport Project extend far beyond mere logistics to reveal fundamental aspects of Neolithic society and belief systems. The decision to undertake such an enormous effort to obtain specific stones from a particular location in Wales suggests that the bluestones possessed special significance that transcended their practical utility as building materials. The Preseli Hills had been a source of stone axes for over a millennium before the Stonehenge bluestones were quarried, with Preseli axes distributed across Britain and continental Europe as prestige items that conveyed both practical value and symbolic meaning. The cultural significance of the Preseli Hills in Neolithic Wales is evidenced by the concentration of monuments in the region, including stone circles, burial chambers, and ceremonial complexes that created a sacred landscape comparable to the Salisbury Plain. The decision to transport bluestones from this established sacred landscape to create a new monument at Stonehenge may reflect complex political and religious relationships between Welsh and English Neolithic communities. Some archaeologists interpret the bluestone transport as evidence of population migration, with Welsh communities physically relocating to the Salisbury Plain and bringing their ancestral stones with them to establish continuity with their homeland. Alternative theories suggest that the bluestone acquisition resulted from alliance building between distant communities, with the Welsh stones serving as gifts that cemented political relationships and facilitated cooperation in large-scale monument construction. The enormous effort required to transport the bluestones would have created lasting bonds between the participating communities, while demonstrating the power and organizational capabilities of the leaders who orchestrated the project. The arrival of the Welsh stones at Stonehenge would have marked a significant moment in the monument's history, transforming it from a regional ceremonial center into a site of national or even international significance. The arrangement of the first bluestone circle at Stonehenge demonstrates careful planning and sophisticated understanding of stone circle design principles. The bluestones were erected in a double circle formation, with an outer ring of approximately 60 stones and an inner ring of roughly 20 stones, all positioned within the existing earthwork enclosure. The stones were not arranged randomly, but followed specific patterns that reflected both practical considerations and symbolic meanings, with taller stones positioned at cardinal points and other astronomically significant locations, while smaller stones filled the intermediate positions. to create a visually harmonious composition. The ritual significance of the completed bluestone circle is evidenced by the dramatic increase in artifact deposits and human burials associated with the monument during this period. Archaeological excavations have recovered substantial quantities of pottery, flint tools, and other material culture from contexts dating to the bluestone period, indicating intensified ceremonial activity. The pottery assemblages include vessels from across Britain and continental Europe, demonstrating that the monument attracted participants from vast distances who came to participate in ceremonies conducted within the stone circle. The bluestones, though later overshadowed by the massive Sarsen trilithons, remained an integral part of Stonehenge throughout its active use, serving as tangible links to the monument's Welsh connections and the extraordinary achievement of their transport across prehistoric Britain. The completion of the bluestone circle marked only the beginning of Stonehenge's most ambitious transformation. Around 2500 BC, a new generation of builders arrived at the monument with plans that would dwarf all previous construction efforts, creating architectural achievements that continue to inspire wonder and investigation more than 4,000 years after their completion. These people, whom archaeologists now recognize as the Beaker culture, brought with them revolutionary technologies, sophisticated social organization, and an architectural vision that would create one of humanity's most enduring monuments. Their goal was nothing less than the construction of massive stone trilithons using Sarsen stones quarried from the Marlborough Downs some 20 miles north of Stonehenge. The Sarsen stones that would form the backbone of the new Stonehenge represented a geological resource of exceptional quality and daunting scale. These massive sandstone blocks, formed during the Paleocene epoch approximately 56 million years ago, lay scattered across the Marlborough Downs as remnants of a once continuous cap rock that had been gradually eroded away over millions of years. The Sarsens varied enormously in size, from relatively modest blocks weighing a few tons to colossal monoliths exceeding 50 tons. The builders of Stonehenge selected only the largest and most regular specimens, choosing stones that could be shaped into the precise dimensions required for their architectural vision. The process of selecting suitable Sarsen stones required extensive survey work across the Marlborough Downs, with teams of specialists examining hundreds of potential blocks to identify those with the proper size, shape, and geological integrity. The chosen stones needed to be free from major fractures or geological weaknesses that might cause them to fail under the enormous stresses of construction and long-term weathering. Archaeological analysis of the Stonehenge Sarsens reveals that the builders demonstrated remarkable geological expertise, consistently selecting stones from specific areas of the downs where the sandstone exhibited optimal characteristics for monumental construction. The transportation of Sarsen stones from the Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge presented logistical challenges that exceeded even the bluestone transport project in scale and complexity. The largest Sarsens required the mobilization of enormous human resources and sophisticated engineering techniques that pushed Neolithic technology to its absolute limits. Experimental archaeology, conducted by teams of engineers and archaeologists, has demonstrated that moving a 40-ton Sarsen stone across the chalk downs would have required a workforce of at least 500 people, along with massive timber sledges, rope systems, and carefully prepared roadways. The construction of the transportation infrastructure alone represented a major engineering undertaking. The route from the Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge crossed numerous valleys, streams, and ridges that required extensive preparation before the massive stones could pass. archaeological survey has identified possible remnants of this prehistoric roadway, including sections where the natural chalk surface was artificially leveled and areas where timber causeways may have been constructed across wet ground. The roadway construction would have required hundreds of workers laboring for months to create a route capable of supporting the enormous weight of the sarsen stones and their transport sledges. The timber sledges used for sarsen transport represented masterpieces of Neolithic engineering, constructed from massive oak timbers joined with sophisticated carpentry techniques. These sledges needed to distribute the enormous weight of the sarsen stones across a wide area to prevent them from sinking into the chalk surface, while remaining maneuverable enough to navigate the undulating terrain of the downs. Experimental reconstructions suggest that the sledges measured at least 15 meters in length and 4 meters in width, constructed from oak timbers up to 60 centimeters in diameter. The sledge construction alone would have required the felling of hundreds of mature oak trees and the labor of skilled carpenters working for several months. The rope systems used to pull the loaded sledges across the landscape represented another technological marvel of the sarsen transport project. Moving a 50-ton load required rope systems capable of generating enormous pulling forces while distributing the load among hundreds of workers. The ropes themselves, likely made from twisted plant fibers or leather strips, needed to be both incredibly strong and flexible enough to allow coordinated pulling by large teams. Archaeological experiments suggest that moving the larger sarsen stones would have required rope systems totaling several miles in length, representing a substantial investment in materials and manufacturing time. Once the sarsen stones reached Stonehenge, the builders faced the equally challenging task of shaping them into the precise forms required for the monument's architectural design. The shaping process relied primarily on sarsen hammers, smaller blocks of the same sandstone material used to pound and chip away unwanted portions of the larger stones. This technique, known as pecking, required enormous patience and skill to achieve the precise dimensions and smooth surfaces visible on the finished trilithons. Archaeological analysis of the shaped sarsens reveals tool marks and surface textures that provide detailed insights into the stonework techniques employed by Neolithic craftsmen. The precision achieved in sarsen stone shaping demonstrates the presence of highly skilled specialists who had developed sophisticated techniques for working with this extremely hard material. The upright stones of the trilithons were carefully tapered, with their upper portions narrowed to create an elegant visual proportion, while maintaining structural integrity. The horizontal lintels were shaped with precise curves that followed the circular plan of the monument, requiring mathematical calculations and careful measurement to ensure proper fit. The surfaces of the most prominent stones were smoothed to a near-polished finish using progressively finer sarsen hammers and abrasive materials. The most remarkable aspect of the sarsen stone preparation was the creation of sophisticated joinery systems that ensured the structural stability of the trilithons. The builders employed mortise and tenon joints, with projecting tenons carved on the tops of the upright stones that fit into corresponding mortises cut into the undersides of the horizontal lintels. These joints, familiar from contemporary woodworking traditions, required extraordinary precision when executed in stone, with tolerances measured in millimeters to ensure proper fit and load distribution. The creation of mortise and tenon joints in sarsen stone represented one of the most technically demanding aspects of the entire construction project. The tenons, typically measuring approximately 30 centimeters in length and 15 centimeters in width, had to be carved with perfect symmetry and precise dimensions to ensure proper fit with their corresponding mortises. The mortises themselves required even greater precision, as any error in their dimensions or positioning would prevent proper assembly of the trilithons. The accuracy achieved in these joints demonstrates the presence of master craftsmen who had developed specialized techniques for measuring and shaping stone with extraordinary precision. Additional joinery techniques employed in the Sarsen construction included tongue and groove joints between adjacent lintel stones, ensuring that the horizontal elements of the monument formed a continuous ring around the circle's perimeter. These joints prevented lateral movement of the lintels while allowing for slight settling and thermal expansion without compromising structural integrity. The complexity of these joinery systems reveals that the Stonehenge builders had adapted sophisticated woodworking techniques for use in stone construction, creating hybrid technologies that combined the best aspects of both materials. The erection of the trilithons themselves represented the culmination of the entire Sarsen construction project, requiring engineering techniques that pushed Neolithic technology to its absolute limits. The process began with the excavation of precisely shaped holes for the upright stones, with each hole carefully calculated to provide adequate support while maintaining proper alignment. The holes for the largest trilithon uprights extended more than 2 meters below ground level, with carefully sloped sides that allowed the massive stones to be slid into position using controlled techniques. Archaeological investigation of the trilithon stone holes has revealed evidence of the sophisticated techniques used to erect the upright stones. Many holes show signs of ramping on one side, where the ground level was gradually raised to create an inclined plane that allowed the stones to be walked upright using rope and lever systems. The opposite sides of the holes were often undercut to provide clearance for the stones as they were raised to vertical positions. Once the uprights were properly positioned, the holes were backfilled with carefully selected chalk rubble and smaller stones that provided secure anchoring for the massive monoliths. The installation of the horizontal lintels presented even greater engineering challenges, as these massive stones needed to be lifted more than 4 meters above ground level and positioned with millimeter precision to engage their mortise and tenon joints. The most widely accepted theory for lintel installation involves the construction of massive timber frameworks that provided both lifting mechanisms and working platforms for the stoneworkers. These timber structures would have required enormous quantities of wood and sophisticated carpentry techniques to create frameworks capable of supporting stones weighing up to 10 tons at considerable heights above the ground. The completed trilithons created an architectural ensemble of unprecedented monumentality in prehistoric Europe. The 5 great trilithons, arranged in a horseshoe pattern within the Sarsen circle, rose to heights exceeding 7 meters above ground level, creating an imposing presence that dominated the surrounding landscape for miles in every direction. The careful graduation of heights, with the central trilithon standing tallest and the outer trilithons progressively shorter, created a sophisticated architectural composition that demonstrated advanced understanding of visual proportion and spatial relationships. The completion of the great trilithons marked not merely an architectural achievement, but the culmination of a complex social transformation that had been developing across the Salisbury Plain for over a millennium. Archaeological evidence reveals that Stonehenge served as both a magnet for diverse populations and a crucible where different cultural traditions merged, creating new forms of religious practice, social organization, and technological innovation. The monument's builders and users represented a remarkably heterogeneous population whose origins stretched across Britain and continental Europe, united by shared beliefs about the power of this sacred landscape and the importance of the ceremonies conducted within its stone circles. Recent isotope analysis of cremated remains found at Stonehenge has revolutionized our understanding of who built and used the monument. revealing patterns of long-distance mobility and cultural exchange that far exceeded what earlier scholars had imagined possible for prehistoric societies. Strontium isotope signatures, which reflect the geological environment where individuals spent their childhood years, reveal that many of those buried at Stonehenge originated from regions far beyond the Salisbury Plain. Analysis conducted by researchers at the University of Oxford examined cremated bone fragments from 25 individuals buried at the site between 3000 and 2500 BC, discovering that at least 15 of these people had grown up in regions with distinctive geological signatures that do not match the local chalk geology. The isotopic evidence points to origins in Western Britain, particularly Wales and the Cornish Peninsula, regions that share geological characteristics with the sources of the Stonehenge bluestones. This discovery provides compelling support for theories that the bluestone transport involved not merely the movement of stones, but the migration of entire communities from Wales to the Salisbury Plain. These migrants brought with them not only their ancestral stones, but also their burial traditions, craft techniques, and religious practices that would profoundly influence Stonehenge's development during its most intensive construction phases. Additional isotope studies have identified individuals whose childhood signatures suggest origins in continental Europe, particularly regions of modern-day Germany and the Netherlands. These continental connections reflect the extensive trade and cultural exchange networks that characterized late Neolithic and early Bronze Age Europe. The presence of foreign-born individuals in Stonehenge's burial population demonstrates that the monument's reputation extended far beyond Britain, attracting pilgrims, craftsmen, and religious practitioners from across the known world of prehistoric Europe. The cremation practices documented at Stonehenge reveal sophisticated mortuary traditions that evolved continuously over more than 1,500 years of use. The earliest cremations, dating to around 3000 BC, were relatively simple affairs involving the burning of bodies on pyres constructed near the monument, with the resulting bone fragments collected and deposited in the Aubrey holes. These early cremations show evidence of careful bone selection, with specific anatomical elements chosen for burial while others were presumably scattered or disposed of elsewhere, suggesting complex beliefs about which portions of the body required formal interment. By 2500 BC, cremation practices at Stonehenge had become considerably more elaborate, incorporating grave goods, structured burial deposits, and evidence of extended mortuary rituals that may have lasted several days. Cremations from this period often include miniature pottery vessels, bone pins, amber beads, and flint tools that accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The quality and exotic origins of these grave goods indicate that access to burial within Stonehenge was increasingly restricted to individuals of high social status or specialized religious roles. The most remarkable cremation deposits from Stonehenge date to the period of trilithon construction, when burial practices reached unprecedented levels of complexity and elaboration. These burials often involved multiple individuals whose cremated remains were mixed together in single deposits, creating communal burials that may have commemorated specific events or ceremonial occasions. Analysis of these mixed deposits has revealed that they often include individuals of different ages and both sexes, suggesting that communal burial was based on factors other than kinship or gender. One particularly significant cremation deposit, discovered near the central trilithon, contained the remains of at least 4 individuals, along with an exceptional collection of grave goods, including a polished stone mace head, gold hair ornaments, and pottery vessels decorated with intricate geometric patterns. The mace head, carved from a distinctive green stone that originated in the Lake District of northern England, represents one of the finest examples of Neolithic stone carving found in Britain. The gold ornaments, among the earliest gold artifacts found at Stonehenge, demonstrate connections to the emerging metallurgical traditions of Bronze Age Europe. The beaker culture, which dominated Stonehenge's later construction phases, introduced revolutionary changes in both burial practices and material culture that reflected broader transformations occurring across Bronze Age Europe, named after their distinctive, bell-shaped pottery vessels. The beaker people represented a cultural phenomenon that spread across Europe between 2800 and 1800 BC, bringing with them new technologies, social structures, and religious practices that would fundamentally alter prehistoric European society. Beaker pottery found at Stonehenge demonstrates the technical sophistication and aesthetic refinement that characterize this cultural tradition. These vessels, typically measuring between 15 and 25 centimeters in height, were shaped with remarkable symmetry and decorated with intricate geometric patterns created using finely toothed combs, twisted cords, or carved stamps pressed into the clay before firing. The decorative motifs show strong consistency across vast geographical areas, from the Iberian Peninsula to the British Isles, indicating the existence of shared symbolic systems and possibly standardized training methods for pottery production. The most spectacular beaker burial discovered near Stonehenge is the grave of the so-called Amesbury Archer, found just 3 miles from the monument in 2002. This individual, who died around 2300 BC, was buried with an unprecedented collection of grave goods, including 16 barbed and tanged flint arrowheads, copper daggers, gold hair ornaments, stone wrist guards, and pottery vessels from multiple cultural traditions. Isotope analysis revealed that the Amesbury Archer had grown up in the alpine regions of Central Europe before migrating to Britain, where he apparently achieved high status within the communities responsible for Stonehenge's later construction phases. The Amesbury Archer's burial demonstrates the international character of the elite networks that developed around Stonehenge during the Beaker period. His grave goods include artifacts that originated across Europe, from flint tools made from French materials to metalwork that shows connections to Central European technological traditions. The archer's physical remains show evidence of a knee injury that would have caused permanent disability, yet his high-status burial indicates that physical impairment did not prevent him from achieving prominent social position within Beaker society. The pattern of disability and injury among individuals buried at Stonehenge has attracted considerable archaeological attention, with researchers identifying an unusually high proportion of burials showing evidence of physical trauma, congenital disorders, and chronic health conditions. Statistical analysis of the Stonehenge burial population reveals that approximately 40% of individuals show evidence of significant physical impairments, a rate substantially higher than that found at contemporary sites elsewhere in Britain. This pattern suggests that Stonehenge may have served as a place of healing where individuals with physical ailments came seeking relief or cure. Evidence for Stonehenge's reputation as a healing center comes from multiple sources, including the unusual concentration of individuals with specific types of injuries and the presence of materials associated with medical practices in prehistoric Europe. Many of the burials show evidence of healed fractures, suggesting that injured individuals survived their trauma and lived for extended periods after their accidents. The presence of individuals with congenital conditions, such as spina bifida and dwarfism, indicates that the monument attracted people whose conditions would have been immediately apparent and may have been interpreted as signs of special spiritual significance. The healing traditions associated with Stonehenge may have been connected to beliefs about the special properties of the bluestones, which continue to play important roles in the monument's ritual activities even after the construction of the massive sarsen trilithons. Medieval Welsh texts describe similar stones from the Preseli Hills as having magical healing properties, and archaeological evidence suggests that fragments of the Stonehenge bluestones were deliberately chipped away, possibly for use in healing rituals or as protective amulets. The wear patterns visible on several of the bluestones indicate that they were repeatedly touched or rubbed by visitors, suggesting that physical contact with the stones was an important component of healing ceremonies. The astronomical alignments incorporated into Stonehenge's design reveal the profound importance of celestial observation in the religious and practical lives of its builders, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of solar and lunar cycles that enabled the creation of a monumental calendar capable of tracking the passage of seasons and predicting significant celestial events. The precision of these alignments, maintained despite the enormous technical challenges of positioning massive stones, demonstrates that astronomical considerations were paramount in the monument's design and construction, reflecting beliefs about the relationship between earthly and celestial realms that shaped every aspect of Neolithic and Bronze Age religious practice. The most famous astronomical alignment at Stonehenge connects the monument's entrance, the heel stone, and the point on the horizon where the sun rises on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, when the sun reaches its northernmost position in its annual journey across the sky. When viewed from the center of the stone circle on the morning of the summer solstice, the sun appears to rise directly over the heel stone, creating a spectacular visual display that marks the year's longest day and the beginning of the sun's gradual return toward its winter position. This alignment, accurate to within a degree, demonstrates that the builders possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge and considered the summer solstice a moment of particular significance worthy of architectural commemoration. The heel stone, a massive sarsen monolith positioned outside the main monument circle, served as a crucial element in the astronomical alignment system. This stone, weighing approximately 35 tons, was carefully positioned to mark the solstice sunrise when viewed from specific locations within the monument. The precision of this positioning required not only accurate astronomical observation, but also sophisticated surveying techniques capable of translating celestial alignments into terrestrial coordinates. The builders needed to determine exactly where the sun would rise on the solstice, calculate the appropriate position for the heel stone, and then transport and erect this massive monolith with sufficient accuracy to maintain the alignment over millennia. The central trilithon was precisely aligned with the winter solstice sunset, creating a dramatic visual effect as the sun appeared to set directly between the massive uprights when viewed from the monument's entrance. This alignment complemented the summer solstice sunrise alignment, creating a solar axis that divided the monument into distinct ceremonial zones associated with the annual cycle of seasons. The winter solstice, marking the shortest day of the year and the beginning of the sun's return toward its summer position, held profound significance for agricultural communities whose survival depended on understanding and predicting seasonal changes. The dual solstice alignments at Stonehenge created a sophisticated solar calendar that marked the two most significant moments in the sun's annual cycle. The summer solstice represented the peak of solar power, the longest day when the sun reached its highest position in the sky and provided maximum light and warmth for growing crops. The winter solstice represented the nadir of solar power, the shortest day when the sun barely rose above the horizon, but also the moment when the days began to lengthen and the promise of spring's return became tangible. These two moments, separated by exactly half a year, provided the fundamental framework for organizing agricultural activities, ceremonial calendars, and social gatherings throughout the prehistoric period. Beyond the primary solstice alignments, Stonehenge incorporates numerous secondary alignments that may have served to track lunar cycles, planetary movements, and other celestial phenomena. The Aubrey holes, with their precise number of 56, may have functioned as a lunar calculator capable of predicting eclipses and tracking the moon's complex 18-year cycle of rising and setting positions. If markers were moved from hole to hole according to established rules, the Aubrey holes could have served as a permanent astronomical computer that allowed priests or astronomers to predict significant celestial events years or even decades in advance. The lunar alignments at Stonehenge reflect the importance of the moon in prehistoric religious and practical life. Unlike the sun, whose movements follow a simple annual cycle, the moon's behavior is considerably more complex, with its rising and setting positions shifting across an 18-year cycle that would have required careful observation over multiple generations to fully understand. The moon's phases, occurring approximately every 29 days, provided a natural calendar for tracking shorter time periods, while lunar eclipses represented dramatic celestial events that may have been interpreted as moments of particular spiritual significance. The station stones, 4 sarsen blocks positioned at the corners of a rectangle within the monument, may have served to mark additional astronomical alignments that extended the monument's observational capabilities beyond the primary solstice axis. The rectangle formed by these stones has proportions that correspond to significant lunar alignments, suggesting that the builders sought to incorporate lunar, as well as solar observations into the monument's design. The station stones' positions would have allowed observers to track the moon's extreme rising and setting positions, providing data necessary for predicting eclipses and understanding the moon's complex behavior. The astronomical knowledge demonstrated at Stonehenge did not develop in isolation but represented the culmination of observational traditions that had been accumulating across Europe for millennia. The alignment of earlier monuments, including long barrows, cursus monuments, and causewayed enclosures, with significant celestial direction suggests that astronomical observation was already an important component of Neolithic religious practice, long before Stonehenge was constructed. The builders of Stonehenge inherited this astronomical tradition and elaborated it to unprecedented levels of sophistication, creating a monument that synthesized centuries of accumulated knowledge into a permanent architectural form. The practical applications of astronomical knowledge extended far beyond religious ceremony to encompass the agricultural activities that sustained prehistoric communities. Accurate knowledge of the solar cycle was essential for determining optimal planting and harvesting times, while lunar observations may have guided activities ranging from fishing and hunting to the scheduling of social gatherings and ceremonial events. The astronomical alignments at Stonehenge thus served both sacred and practical purposes, providing the calendrical framework that organized all aspects of prehistoric life while commemorating the celestial powers that governed the natural world. The construction of astronomical alignments into permanent stone monuments represented a revolutionary development in human intellectual history, transforming ephemeral observations into enduring architectural forms that could be consulted and verified across generations. Unlike oral traditions, which could be corrupted or lost through failures of memory or social disruption, the stone alignments at Stonehenge provided permanent records of astronomical knowledge that remained accurate for millennia. This permanence allowed astronomical traditions to accumulate and develop over extended periods, with each generation building upon the observations and insights of their predecessors. The astronomical sophistication demonstrated at Stonehenge challenges earlier assumptions about the intellectual capabilities of prehistoric societies, revealing that Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples possessed observational skills and mathematical understanding that rivaled those of contemporary civilizations in the Mediterranean and Near East. The precision of the Stonehenge alignments required not only accurate observation, but also sophisticated techniques for recording, analyzing, and applying astronomical data that demonstrate advanced cognitive capabilities. These achievements suggest that prehistoric European societies developed intellectual traditions of considerable sophistication that have been underestimated by scholars who assumed that complex astronomical knowledge required the support of literate urban civilizations. The Great Trilithons stood complete by 1600 BC, their massive sarsen stones testament to the organizational power and technical mastery of the Beaker culture. Yet even as these monuments reached their final architectural form, the forces that had created them were already beginning to transform. The early Bronze Age brought fundamental changes to British society that would gradually alter both the use and significance of Stonehenge, initiating a long process of modification and eventual abandonment that would span the next 1,000 years. The monument that had served as the focal point of regional religious and political life would gradually fade from active use, though its power to inspire awe and reverence would never entirely disappear. The most significant architectural changes during the early Bronze Age involved the rearrangement of the bluestones that had been brought from Wales nearly a millennium earlier. Around 1600 BC, the builders undertook a comprehensive reorganization of these sacred stones, dismantling the existing bluestone arrangements and creating new configurations that better integrated with the completed sarsen structure. This rearrangement was not merely aesthetic, but reflected changing ritual requirements and evolving religious practices that demanded different spatial relationships between the monument's various elements. Archaeological investigation of the bluestone rearrangement has revealed the complexity of this undertaking. The builders carefully removed each bluestone from its existing position, transported it to a new location within the monument, and re-erected it according to a predetermined plan that demonstrates sophisticated architectural planning. Stone holes from this period show evidence of multiple reuses, with some positions receiving several different stones in succession as the builders experimented with various arrangements before settling on their final configuration. While the builders were modifying the monument's stone arrangements, broader cultural changes were transforming Bronze Age society across Britain. The communal monument building traditions that had characterized the Neolithic period gradually gave way to more individualistic practices that emphasized personal wealth, status, and achievement over collective ritual activities. This transformation is most clearly visible in burial practices, where the large communal cemeteries of the Neolithic period were replaced by individual barrow burials that celebrated the achievements of specific individuals rather than community solidarity. The round barrows that began appearing across the Salisbury Plain during the early Bronze Age represent a fundamental shift in how Bronze Age communities understood death, memory, and social organization. These individual burial mounds, typically measuring between 15 and 30 meters in diameter, were constructed to commemorate specific individuals whose social status or achievements warranted permanent memorial. The barrows were positioned to be visible from considerable distances, serving as lasting monuments to the deceased, while asserting territorial claims and family prestige across the landscape. Archaeological investigation of Bronze Age round barrows near Stonehenge has revealed burial practices of extraordinary richness and complexity. The Normanton Down Barrow Cemetery, located just over a mile south of Stonehenge, contains more than 40 individual burial mounds, dating to the early and middle Bronze Age periods. Excavations of these barrows have uncovered some of the richest grave good assemblages known from prehistoric Britain, including gold ornaments, bronze weapons, exotic pottery, and materials that originated from across Europe and beyond. The Bush Barrow Burial, excavated in 1808, exemplifies the wealth and international connections of the Bronze Age elite who continued to use the Stonehenge landscape for their most important ceremonies. This burial contained a male individual, accompanied by an extraordinary collection of grave goods, including 3 bronze daggers, a stone mace head, gold belt hook, gold lozenge ornament, and wooden objects decorated with gold studs. The bronze daggers show influences from multiple European metalwork traditions, while the gold work demonstrates technical sophistication that rivals contemporary examples from the most advanced centers of Bronze Age Europe. The concentration of wealthy barrow burials around Stonehenge suggests that the monument continued to attract elite individuals who sought association with its sacred power and ancient prestige. However, the shift from communal burial within the monument itself to individual barrow burial in the surrounding landscape reflects fundamental changes in social organization and religious belief. The monument was no longer primarily a cemetery where community members sought eternal rest among their ancestors, but rather a ceremonial center where elite individuals conducted rituals that reinforced their social status and political authority. Despite these changes in burial practices, archaeological evidence indicates that ritual activity at Stonehenge itself continued throughout the early Bronze Age, though with different characteristics and purposes than in earlier periods. Excavations have uncovered numerous votive deposits dating to this period, including carefully placed collections of pottery vessels, bronze implements, and exotic materials that were deliberately buried or deposited within the monument as offerings to supernatural powers or ancestral spirits. As the Bronze Age progressed, evidence for large-scale construction activities at Stonehenge diminishes significantly, reflecting broader changes in how communities allocated their resources and organized their collective activities. The massive labor mobilization that had characterized earlier construction phases was no longer feasible or necessary as social organization shifted toward more hierarchical structures that concentrated wealth and authority in the hands of elite individuals, rather than community leaders who derived their power from their ability to organize collective projects. Regional political changes during the Middle Bronze Age further contributed to Stonehenge's transformation from active construction site to established ceremonial center. The emergence of hill forts and defended settlements across southern Britain indicated a shift toward more localized power structures, with individual communities asserting territorial control rather than participating in the kind of pan-regional cooperation that had characterized Stonehenge's construction. The monument remained important, but its role evolved from active ritual center to ancestral landmark, a place whose significance derived increasingly from its antiquity rather than from ongoing ceremonial activity. The environmental changes of the late Bronze Age accelerated this transformation. Climate deterioration around 1200 BCE brought cooler, wetter conditions that challenged agricultural productivity and may have contributed to social instability. Communities focused increasingly on survival and local concerns, with less energy available for maintaining distant ceremonial connections. Stonehenge stood silent through these troubled times, its stones witnessing the gradual abandonment of the surrounding ritual landscape as populations concentrated in more defensible locations. Yet even in decline, Stonehenge retained a powerful hold on human imagination. The very fact of its survival, massive stones standing where human hands had placed them centuries or millennia earlier, spoke to something enduring in human achievement. Later Bronze Age peoples may not have understood exactly who had built the monument or why, but they recognized its significance as a link to ancestral times. The stones became monuments to memory itself, physical proof that great things had once been accomplished in this place. The transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age around 800 BCE brought new peoples, new technologies, and new belief systems to Britain, yet Stonehenge endured. Iron Age communities developed their own relationships with the ancient monument, incorporating it into their mythologies and occasionally using the site for their own purposes. Archaeological evidence suggests sporadic Iron Age activity at Stonehenge, though nothing approaching the intensive use of earlier periods. The monument had become what it would remain for the next 3,000 years, a mysterious inheritance from a forgotten past, inspiring wonder and speculation in all who encountered it. The Roman conquest of Britain in 43 CE brought Stonehenge into contact with the classical world, initiating a new chapter in the monument's long history. Roman soldiers and administrators, accustomed to the architectural achievements of their own civilization, must have regarded the ancient stones with a mixture of curiosity and perhaps condescension. No Roman writer left detailed accounts of Stonehenge, suggesting that while the monument was known, it did not capture Roman imagination in the way that other British curiosities did. Yet archaeological evidence reveals that Romans did visit the site, leaving behind coins, pottery, and other artifacts that testify to their presence. The Roman period saw Britain transformed by roads, towns, and villas, yet Stonehenge stood apart from this new order. The monument lay distant from major Roman settlements and roads, preserving its isolation even as the landscape around it changed. This geographical marginality may have contributed to Stonehenge's survival. Unlike many prehistoric monuments that were dismantled for building materials or destroyed to make way for Roman construction, Stonehenge remained largely undisturbed. The Romans, for all their engineering prowess, apparently saw no need to modify or remove the ancient stones. Roman religious policy toward native British beliefs was generally tolerant, allowing traditional practices to continue alongside the official Roman cults. Whether Stonehenge retained any active religious function during the Roman period remains uncertain. Some archaeologists have suggested that the monument may have served as a gathering place for those maintaining pre-Roman traditions, a physical link to ancestral beliefs in an era of rapid cultural change. Others argue that by Roman times, Stonehenge had already become purely archaeological, a relic of the distant past rather than a living sacred site. The end of Roman Britain in the early 5th century CE initiated a period of dramatic transformation that would reshape British society and culture. The withdrawal of Roman administration left a power vacuum filled by competing warlords, migrating peoples, and eventually the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that would dominate medieval England. Through these turbulent centuries, Stonehenge endured, its stones standing witness to the rise and fall of kingdoms, the spread of Christianity, and the gradual emergence of English national identity. The Anglo-Saxon period brought new peoples to the Salisbury Plain, Germanic migrants who established settlements and kingdoms across southern Britain. These newcomers encountered Stonehenge as a mysterious inheritance from an unknown past, and their responses shaped medieval understanding of the monument. Anglo-Saxon place names in the region suggest awareness of the stone's significance. The name Stonehenge itself derives from Old English, meaning hanging stones or stone gallows, reflecting the dramatic appearance of the trilithons, with their massive lintels suspended between uprights. Medieval chronicles and legends wove Stonehenge into the mythological fabric of British history, creating explanations for the monument's origins that reflected contemporary beliefs and concerns. The most influential of these legends appeared in Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, written around 1136 CE. Geoffrey attributed Stonehenge's construction to the wizard Merlin, who supposedly transported the stones magically from Ireland to serve as a memorial for British nobles treacherously murdered by Saxon invaders. This legend, though historically worthless, captured something essential about Stonehenge's power: its ability to inspire wonder and demand explanation. Geoffrey's account reflected medieval assumptions about the impossibility of moving such massive stones through human effort alone. The idea that supernatural intervention was required spoke to the genuine mystery of Stonehenge's construction, a mystery that would not begin to be resolved until modern archaeological investigation. Yet the legend also served political purposes, linking Stonehenge to British resistance against Saxon invasion and establishing the monument as a symbol of native British identity. In an era when Norman rulers sought to legitimize their conquest by connecting themselves to pre-Saxon British traditions, Stonehenge became a powerful symbol of ancient British greatness. The medieval period saw Stonehenge incorporated into the administrative and religious structures of English society. The monument lay within the bounds of Amesbury Abbey, a wealthy Benedictine institution that controlled much of the surrounding land. The abbey's records provide occasional glimpses of medieval attitudes toward Stonehenge, though the monks seem to have regarded the stones primarily as a curiosity rather than a threat to Christian orthodoxy. Unlike some prehistoric monuments that were Christianized through the addition of crosses or chapels, Stonehenge remained essentially unchanged, its pagan origins acknowledged but not actively contested. Medieval visitors to Stonehenge left few records of their impressions, but the monument clearly attracted attention from those traveling through the region. The stones appeared in medieval manuscripts and maps, their distinctive silhouette recognizable even in stylized representations. Pilgrims traveling to Salisbury Cathedral or other religious sites may have detoured to view the ancient monument, adding Stonehenge to the informal network of notable places that medieval travelers sought out. The monument's reputation as a wonder of Britain was established long before the modern tourism industry formalized such designations. The Renaissance brought new approaches to understanding the past, including Stonehenge. Antiquarians, early practitioners of what would become archaeology, began systematic study of ancient monuments, seeking to understand them through observation and measurement rather than legend and speculation. William Camden's Britannia, first published in 1586, included a description of Stonehenge that attempted to move beyond medieval mythology toward more rational explanation. Camden acknowledged uncertainty about the monument's origins, while rejecting the more fanciful elements of Geoffrey of Monmouth's account. The 17th century saw increasingly sophisticated attempts to understand Stonehenge through careful observation and measurement. Inigo Jones, the famous architect, visited the site and produced detailed drawings that remain valuable historical documents. Jones argued that Stonehenge was a Roman temple, an interpretation that reflected his classical training and the general assumption that only civilized peoples could have created such impressive architecture. Though wrong about Roman origins, Jones's work represented an important step toward scientific study of the monument. John Aubrey, writing later in the 17th century, made crucial observations that would eventually lead to correct understanding of Stonehenge's origins. Aubrey noted the similarity between Stonehenge and other stone circles found throughout Britain, suggesting a common cultural origin predating Roman arrival. He attributed these monuments to the druids, the priestly class of pre-Roman Celtic society described by classical authors. Though the druid connection would later prove chronologically impossible, Stonehenge predates the druids by millennia. Aubrey's recognition of Stonehenge as a pre-Roman British monument represented significant progress. The 18th century brought William Stukeley, whose passionate advocacy for the Druid interpretation would shape popular understanding of Stonehenge for generations. Stukely conducted careful surveys of Stonehenge and the surrounding landscape, producing drawings and measurements that remain valuable to modern researchers. His recognition of the avenue and its alignment toward the midsummer sunrise demonstrated genuine archaeological insight. Yet Stukely's romantic attachment to the Druids led him to interpret all evidence through this lens, creating an association between Stonehenge and Druidism that persists in popular imagination despite being historically unfounded. The Druid interpretation of Stonehenge reflected broader cultural currents of the 18th century, including Romanticism's celebration of nature, Primitivism's idealization of pre-civilized societies, and nationalism's search for distinctive national traditions. The Druids, as described by classical authors, seem to embody wisdom, spirituality, and connection to nature, qualities that appeal to those disillusioned with industrial modernity. Stonehenge, reimagined as a Druid temple, became a symbol of ancient British spirituality, a physical link to a purer, more authentic past. This romantic interpretation had lasting consequences for Stonehenge's cultural significance. Modern Druid groups, though having no historical connection to ancient Druids, adopted Stonehenge as a sacred site, conducting ceremonies at the summer solstice that continue to this day. The association between Stonehenge and alternative spirituality, established in the 18th century, has proven remarkably durable, shaping public perception of the monument, even as archaeological research has revealed its true Neolithic origins. The 19th century brought the beginnings of scientific archaeology to Stonehenge, with excavations that sought to understand the monument through systematic investigation rather than speculation. These early excavations, though crude by modern standards, revealed important information about Stonehenge's construction and use. The discovery of cremated human remains confirmed the monument's funerary function, while analysis of the stones themselves began to reveal their geological origins. Each excavation added pieces to the puzzle, gradually building the understanding that would culminate in modern archaeological interpretation. Victorian interest in Stonehenge reflected the era's broader fascination with origins, the origins of species, the origins of civilization, the origins of the British nation. The monument became a touchstone for debates about human progress, with some seeing it as evidence of primitive superstition and others as proof of ancient wisdom. The development of prehistoric archaeology as a discipline provided new frameworks for understanding Stonehenge, placing it within sequences of cultural development that stretched back to the earliest human presence in Britain. The 20th century transformed both Stonehenge itself and our understanding of it. The monument, which had remained in private hands for centuries, was purchased and donated to the nation in 1918, ensuring its preservation for future generations. Subsequent decades saw major restoration efforts, with fallen stones re-erected and the site protected from the damage caused by increasing visitor numbers. These interventions, though sometimes controversial, reflected growing recognition of Stonehenge's importance as a national and global heritage site. Archaeological techniques developed during the 20th century revolutionized understanding of Stonehenge. Radiocarbon dating, introduced in the 1950s, provided the first reliable chronology for the monument's construction, revealing its true Neolithic age and definitively disproving the Druid interpretation. Aerial photography revealed the full extent of the surrounding ritual landscape, showing Stonehenge as the centerpiece of a complex sacred geography. Geophysical survey detected buried features invisible on the surface, adding new dimensions to understanding of the site. The application of modern scientific techniques to Stonehenge has transformed our understanding of the monument, while simultaneously revealing new mysteries that challenge researchers. Each technological advance, from radiocarbon dating to DNA analysis, from laser scanning to isotope studies, has added layers of complexity to the Stonehenge story, showing that the monument was even more remarkable than previous generations had imagined. Yet for every question answered, new questions emerge, ensuring that Stonehenge remains an active field of research rather than a solved puzzle. Radiocarbon dating, developed in the mid-20th century, provided the first reliable chronology for Stonehenge's construction. Before this technique, estimates of the monument's age varied wildly, with some scholars arguing for Roman or even medieval origins. Radiocarbon analysis of organic materials from the site, charcoal, bone, antler picks, established that Stonehenge's construction began around 3000 BCE and continued for over a millennium. This dating placed Stonehenge firmly in the Neolithic period, contemporary with the Egyptian pyramids, and predating the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome by thousands of years. The implications of this dating were profound. Stonehenge was not the product of a known historical civilization, but of prehistoric peoples who left no written records. Understanding the monument required reconstructing an entire society from archaeological evidence alone, a challenging task that continues to occupy researchers. The Neolithic dating also demolished the Druid interpretation once and for all, since the Druids described by classical authors lived thousands of years after Stonehenge's construction. Whatever beliefs motivated Stonehenge's builders, they were not those of the Celtic priesthood. Isotope analysis has emerged as one of the most powerful tools for understanding the people of Stonehenge. By analyzing the chemical composition of human teeth and bones, researchers can determine where individuals grew up, what they ate, and how they moved across the landscape during their lifetimes. This technique has revealed that Stonehenge attracted people from across Britain and beyond, with some individuals traveling from as far as the Mediterranean region. The monument was not merely a local shrine, but an international pilgrimage destination, drawing visitors from distant lands. The Amesbury Archer, discovered in 2002, exemplifies the insights provided by isotope analysis. This wealthy individual, buried near Stonehenge around 2300 BCE with an impressive array of grave goods including gold ornaments and copper knives, grew up in the Alpine region of Central Europe. His presence near Stonehenge during the monument's final construction phase suggests connections between Britain and the continent that previous generations of researchers had not suspected. The archer may have been a metalworker, bringing new technologies to Britain, or a pilgrim drawn by Stonehenge's reputation, or both. DNA analysis has added another dimension to understanding Stonehenge's builders and users. Ancient DNA extracted from human remains reveals genetic relationships between individuals, population movements, and connections to modern populations. Research has shown that the Neolithic farmers who built Stonehenge were largely replaced by Bronze Age migrants from the continent, meaning that modern British people are not direct descendants of the monument's creators. This genetic discontinuity adds poignancy to Stonehenge's significance. The monument outlasted the very population that created it. Laser scanning and photogrammetry have revealed details of Stonehenge's construction invisible to the naked eye. High-resolution scans of the stones show tool marks, graffiti, and surface features that document both ancient construction techniques and centuries of subsequent modification. Analysis of these marks has revealed that different stones were worked with different techniques, suggesting either evolution in construction methods over time or the involvement of multiple work crews with distinct traditions. The precision of some carvings indicates sophisticated planning and execution that challenges assumptions about prehistoric capabilities. Geophysical survey has transformed understanding of the landscape surrounding Stonehenge. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and other remote sensing techniques can detect buried features without excavation, revealing a hidden landscape of monuments, pits, and structures that once surrounded the stones. The Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes project, conducted in the 2010s, discovered numerous previously unknown features, including massive timber buildings, burial mounds, and ritual pits. This research showed that Stonehenge was the centerpiece of a vast ceremonial complex, not an isolated monument. The discovery of Durrington Walls' true scale and function revolutionized understanding of Stonehenge's social context. This massive henge, located 2 miles from Stonehenge, enclosed an area of over 36 acres and contained numerous timber structures interpreted as houses. Excavations revealed evidence of feasting on an enormous scale, with thousands of pig bones indicating consumption of vast quantities of pork. Researchers now interpret Durrington Walls as a settlement for the workers and pilgrims who built and visited Stonehenge, providing the first glimpse of the living community behind the monument. The avenue connecting Stonehenge to the River Avon has received renewed attention from researchers seeking to understand how the monument was approached and experienced. Excavations have confirmed that the avenue was a formal processional route, carefully constructed with parallel banks and ditches that guided visitors toward the stones. The avenue's alignment toward the midsummer sunrise suggests that approach to Stonehenge was timed to coincide with celestial events, with pilgrims walking toward the rising sun as they approach the sacred stones. Recent research has focused increasingly on the soundscape of Stonehenge, exploring how the monument may have been experienced acoustically. Studies have shown that the stone circle creates distinctive acoustic effects, with sounds reflecting and resonating in ways that would have been noticeable to ancient visitors. Some researchers have suggested that these acoustic properties were intentional, with the stones arranged to enhance ritual sounds such as drumming or chanting. While such interpretations remain speculative, they highlight the multisensory nature of ancient ritual experience. The bluestones continue to generate research and controversy. The discovery of their Welsh origins in the early 20th century raised questions about transport that remain unresolved. Recent excavations at the Preseli quarries have revealed evidence of Neolithic activity, including stone extraction and possible ceremonial use. Some researchers now argue that the bluestones were sacred before their transport to Stonehenge, perhaps forming a stone circle in Wales that was dismantled and moved to Salisbury Plain. This interpretation suggests that Stonehenge incorporated the spiritual power of an existing sacred site, adding layers of meaning to the monument. The question of how the bluestones were transported remains contentious. The traditional interpretation, that they were dragged overland and floated on rafts, has been challenged by geologists who argue that glacial action could have deposited Welsh stones on Salisbury Plain naturally. However, the specific types of bluestone at Stonehenge match particular outcrops in the Preseli Hills, making glacial transport seem unlikely. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that moving large stones using Neolithic technology is possible, though extremely labor-intensive. The truth may involve a combination of human effort and natural processes, with glacially transported stones supplemented by deliberately quarried material. The Sarsen stones present their own mysteries. While their source in the Marlborough Downs has long been known, recent research has refined understanding of exactly where the stones originated. Geochemical analysis has shown that most of the sarcens came from a single location, West Woods, about 15 miles north of Stonehenge. This finding suggests organized quarrying, rather than opportunistic collection of scattered boulders, indicating a level of planning and coordination that speaks to sophisticated social organization. The engineering achievements represented by Stonehenge continue to impress modern researchers. Moving and erecting stones weighing up to 25 tons required not only physical strength, but also sophisticated understanding of mechanics, materials, and project management. Experimental reconstructions have demonstrated various possible techniques, from wooden sledges and rollers to lever systems and earthen ramps. While the exact methods used remain uncertain, the success of the project testifies to the capabilities of Neolithic engineers working without metal tools or wheeled vehicles. Computer modeling has enabled researchers to explore aspects of Stonehenge that cannot be investigated through excavation. Simulations of the monument's astronomical alignments have confirmed the precision of its solar and lunar orientations, while revealing additional alignments that may have been intentional. Models of construction sequences have tested different hypotheses about how the monument was built, identifying the most efficient methods and highlighting the challenges faced by ancient builders. Virtual reconstructions allow researchers and the public to experience Stonehenge as it may have appeared at different stages of its history. Climate reconstruction has placed Stonehenge within its environmental context, revealing how changing conditions may have influenced the monument's construction and use. The Neolithic period saw relatively warm, stable climate that supported the agricultural surplus necessary for monumental construction. The Bronze Age brought increasing variability, with periods of deterioration that may have contributed to changes in how Stonehenge was used. Understanding these environmental factors helps explain the rhythms of construction and abandonment that characterize the monument's history. Despite decades of research, fundamental questions about Stonehenge remain unanswered. The precise beliefs that motivated its construction, the rituals performed within its circle, the social organization that coordinated its building, all remain subjects of informed speculation rather than certain knowledge. The absence of written records from prehistoric Britain means that some questions may never be definitively answered. Yet this uncertainty is part of Stonehenge's enduring appeal, ensuring that the monument continues to inspire wonder and investigation. As we stand at the threshold of a new era in human history, Stonehenge endures as a testament to our species' deepest aspirations and most remarkable achievements. The stones that Neolithic hands raised 5 millennia ago continue to speak across the ages, their message evolving with each generation that encounters them. In an age of digital ephemera and accelerating change, Stonehenge offers something increasingly rare: permanence, mystery, and connection to the vast sweep of human time. The preservation of Stonehenge for future generations represents one of humanity's most important cultural responsibilities. The monument has survived 5,000 years of natural weathering, human interference, and changing attitudes toward the past. Its continued survival requires active stewardship, protection from environmental damage, management of visitor impacts, and ongoing research to understand and document its features. The organizations responsible for Stonehenge's care face the challenge of balancing public access with preservation, ensuring that future generations can experience the monument while protecting it from the very popularity that makes it significant. Climate change poses new threats to Stonehenge and the surrounding landscape. Rising temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and increased frequency of extreme weather events may accelerate weathering of the stones and damage buried archaeological features. The chalk grassland that surrounds Stonehenge, itself a product of millennia of human land management, faces challenges from changing conditions. Protecting Stonehenge in the coming centuries will require adaptation to environmental changes that the monument's builders could never have imagined. The ongoing debate over the A303 road tunnel exemplifies the tensions between preservation and development that surround Stonehenge. The current road, which passes within yards of the stones, creates noise, pollution, and visual intrusion that diminish the monument's setting. Proposals to route the road through a tunnel would restore the landscape's tranquility, while improving transportation infrastructure. Yet tunnel construction itself poses risks to archaeological features, and some argue that any intervention in such a sensitive landscape is inappropriate. These debates reflect broader questions about how societies balance heritage preservation with contemporary needs. Stonehenge's influence extends far beyond its physical location, shaping global understanding of prehistoric achievement and inspiring countless works of art, literature, and music. The monument has become a universal symbol of ancient mystery, appearing in contexts ranging from serious archaeological documentaries to science fiction fantasies. This cultural ubiquity reflects Stonehenge's power to capture human imagination, its ability to represent something essential about our species' relationship with time, place, and meaning. The summer solstice celebrations at Stonehenge have become a global phenomenon, attracting thousands of visitors who gather to watch the sunrise align with the ancient stones. These celebrations, though having no historical connection to Neolithic practices, represent a genuine human need for ritual, community, and connection to cosmic cycles. The sight of diverse crowds, modern druids, curious tourists, spiritual seekers, and local residents, gathered among the stones at dawn speaks to Stonehenge's continuing power to bring people together in shared experience. Modern druid groups, though historically unconnected to Stonehenge's builders, have developed meaningful relationships with the monument that deserve respect. Their ceremonies, conducted with sincerity and reverence, represent contemporary spiritual practice rather than historical reenactment. The negotiation between heritage managers and druid groups over access to Stonehenge reflects broader questions about who owns the past and how ancient sites should be used in the present. These discussions, sometimes contentious, ultimately enrich understanding of Stonehenge's significance. The digital age has transformed how people encounter and understand Stonehenge. Virtual tours allow those who cannot visit in person to explore the monument in detail, while online databases make research accessible to anyone with internet access. Social media spreads images of Stonehenge around the world, introducing the monument to audiences who might never have encountered it otherwise. Yet digital engagement cannot fully replace physical presence. The experience of standing among the stones, feeling their mass and age, remains irreplaceable. Stonehenge's designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site recognizes its outstanding universal value, while imposing obligations for its protection. The World Heritage Convention, adopted in 1972, represents humanity's collective commitment to preserving sites of exceptional cultural and natural significance. Stonehenge's inclusion on the World Heritage List places it among the most important places on Earth, alongside the Pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, and the Taj Mahal. This recognition brings both prestige and responsibility, ensuring international attention to the monument's preservation. The lessons of Stonehenge extend beyond archaeology to speak to fundamental questions about human nature and capability. The monument demonstrates that prehistoric peoples, often dismissed as primitive, were capable of sophisticated planning, engineering, and artistic expression. Their achievement challenges assumptions about progress and civilization, suggesting that human creativity and ambition are constants across time, rather than products of modern development. Stonehenge reminds us that our ancestors were fully human, with the same capacity for wonder, devotion, and achievement that we possess today. The collaborative effort required to build Stonehenge offers lessons for contemporary society. The monument could not have been created by individuals or small groups. It required coordination across communities, regions, and generations. People who would never see the completed monument contributed their labor, trusting that future generations would continue the work. This intergenerational cooperation, sustained over centuries, represents a model of collective action that seems increasingly relevant as humanity faces challenges requiring long-term thinking and broad collaboration. Stonehenge's astronomical alignments, connected to humanity's oldest and most universal preoccupation, understanding our place in the cosmos. The builders who aligned the stones with solar and lunar cycles were engaging with the same questions that drive modern astronomy and cosmology. Their methods differed from ours, but their curiosity about celestial phenomena reflects a fundamental human trait. Stonehenge stands as evidence that the scientific impulse, the desire to observe, measure, and understand natural phenomena, predates written history. The mystery that surrounds Stonehenge is not merely a gap in our knowledge, but an essential part of the monument's significance. Complete understanding would diminish Stonehenge, reducing it from living mystery to solved puzzle. The questions that remain about beliefs, rituals, social organization, and meaning ensure that Stonehenge continues to engage human imagination. Each generation brings new questions and new methods, finding in the ancient stones reflections of contemporary concerns and aspirations. As humanity ventures into space, Stonehenge takes on new significance as a marker of our species' journey. The monument represents a crucial stage in human development, the emergence of complex societies capable of monumental construction and abstract thought. Future generations, perhaps living on other worlds, may look back at Stonehenge as evidence of the creativity and ambition that carried humanity beyond its home planet. The stones that Neolithic hands raised may ultimately be seen as early steps on a journey that leads to the stars. The environmental consciousness emerging in contemporary society finds resonance in Stonehenge's relationship with its landscape. The monument's builders worked with natural materials, shaped by natural forces, aligned with natural cycles. Their achievement was integrated with, rather than opposed to, the natural world. As modern societies grapple with environmental challenges, Stonehenge offers a model of human creativity that enhances rather than degrades its setting. The monument reminds us that human achievement need not come at nature's expense. Stonehenge's survival through 5 millennia of change offers hope for humanity's future. The monument has outlasted empires, religions, and civilizations, enduring through climate shifts, social upheavals, and technological revolutions. Its persistence suggests that human creations can transcend the circumstances of their making, carrying meaning across vast stretches of time. In an age of anxiety about the future, Stonehenge stands as evidence that some things endure, that human achievement can outlast human memory. The stones themselves, weathered by millennia of rain and wind, bear witness to the passage of time in ways that words cannot capture. Their surfaces, once freshly dressed by Neolithic craftsmen, now show the patina of ages. Lichens grow where hands once worked, and the sharp edges of ancient tool marks have softened with time. Yet the stones remain, their essential form unchanged, their presence as powerful as when they were first raised. They will continue to stand, witnesses to whatever future humanity creates. As the sun rises on another solstice morning, casting long shadows across the Salisbury Plain, Stonehenge awaits. The stones have seen countless such dawns, each one marking another turn in the endless cycle of seasons. They have witnessed the full span of human civilization, from Neolithic farmers to digital nomads, from stone tools to smartphones. They will witness whatever comes next, standing patient and eternal, while human generations pass like clouds across the sky. In the end, Stonehenge's greatest gift may be perspective. The monument reminds us that we are part of a story far larger than our individual lives, a story that began long before us and will continue long after. The people who built Stonehenge are gone, their names forgotten, their individual stories lost to time. Yet their achievement endures, speaking across millennia to all who encounter it. We too will pass, but perhaps something of what we create will endure, carrying our aspirations forward to generations we will never know. The stones stand. They have always stood. They will stand still when the last human eye has closed, monuments to a species that once looked up at the stars and wondered. In their silence, they speak of everything we have been and everything we might become. They are Stonehenge, and they are eternal.